Hello, everyone. My name is Wendy Wilkins. I'm the director of the Screenplay Competition and the Screenwriting Education for the Mystic Film Festival. We are so excited to have you here today, joining our screenwriting panel. We have a wonderful moderator and some panelists that I'll introduce to you. So good morning, depending on where you are, good afternoon and good evening, and we will get this thing started. So our guest moderator today is Michael Starrbury. He is a producer, director, and writer, actor. He's well known for When They See Us, The Inevitable Defeat of Mr. and Pete, and The Great Unknown. And I'm sure he can share some other things with you because he's been writing for quite some time. Our panelists, we have Felicity Wren, who is the Director of Development at the ISA, International Screenwriters Association. Jessica Hines, the founder and creator of Meditative Writing. And Jorge Gonzalez, Director of Operations at Roadmap Writers. So welcome, everyone.
Hello.
Good morning, good afternoon.
How's everyone doing today?
Good.
Good. How are you, Michael?
I am hanging in there. Winter started early in Minnesota, but
It's starting late in New York, so I'm send some more vibes your way.
So, yeah, do you want us to just jump in right away? I can start.
That sounds awesome.
You guys ready? Okay. So, welcome everyone. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to talk about screenwriting a little bit of the business, get into some craft things as well. The first question I'm going to ask is, what is the state of screenwriting right now? I'm going to start with Felicity because that's the kind of the clockwise order that I have on my screen. What is the state of screenwriting right now? And if you don't mind talking a little bit about what producers and studios and everyone who can afford to make a movie or a TV show, what are they looking for these days?
Well, I think the state of screenwriting right now is actually that it's never been better. Is kind of the actual the process of screenwriting, the scripts that people are writing, the time, the energy, the work. I think there has been at the International Screenwriters Association anyway, we have seen across the board a rise in entries for our contests and actually a rise in the standard. So I feel like for screenwriting in general, there's something about being in a pandemic or, I think it's like the plague happened in the UK and people wrote incredible kind of stories then. It's like it really brings out the best in people when they're in adversity. So I think for the scripts themselves, the writers, they're working harder, the stuff is getting better, there's more maybe more processing happening about how you feel about stuff and that feeling and that empathy, and that really translates to the words. And then for the industry itself, I mean, that is a really, really big question that I'm sure there's kind of like loads of different facets to it. But the meetings I'm having at the moment with exec producers and studios and buyers, it is really the same thing as ever in the fact that they want something that stands out, that's unique, that's original, that has voice, that has purpose, that means something. But right now, feature films, it's actually very hard, I think, to get a feature film funded right now. There's much more moving away from features and towards TV in the meetings that I'm having. And even inside of that, a lot of YA stuff and animation. Animation at this time, you don't need people on sets. And with COVID and the stuff that's happening, I think that is really, it's at the forefront of people's minds because of stuff like insurance, safety, new protocols. It's a big picture kind of story. And it is changing the things that people are writing because of that. And you should be sensitive to that.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that you said. Jess, are you having the same experience right now? Are you finding that, it's still, I mean, because good writing is good writing, good storytelling is good storytelling. What has changed during this time that would make it, either easier or, something that writers can be careful of to not to do to, succeed in the industry?
Well, it was interesting when this question was brought up because I feel like, great writers, like I just don't believe in chasing trends. I mean, like half the writers I work with, they're already repped and they're working on shows and they have the connections and they're going to be asked to work on certain things. So them shifting what they're doing in the immediate might make sense. If you're an emerging writer and you haven't broken into the industry, I think that making any shifts or changes on like the type of work you do and what you want to do doesn't make sense, because I feel like by the time you get something written and you get it out there, COVID's going to be gone. And now we're going to be like, yes, big stuff with casts, everything and indoors. And so I think in the short term, I think everyone should really just, always stay true to your voice and the type of stuff you want to work, and know that like, just like great fashion designers, it's like, the stores chase the trends. The artists should be just making their art and telling their truth and allowing the trends to eventually like pick them up like little waves. But I think that psychologically what's going on, which is quite interesting, is, and I see this every time we have a big shift, like the same thing happened in 2008, that when there's a huge sort of shift in the country, it does what good screenwriting does, which is it calms the disturbed and it disturbs the calm. And so I feel like there's been a massive rise in people who have lost their jobs, which is very unfortunate. But I think I've heard a lot of those people go, well, you know what? Now I finally have time to write. Now I finally have time I can use this time and make the most out of this really terrible situation. And I've been, very excited that there's a large group of people right now that are honoring their artistic desires, very similar to what I saw in 2008, where suddenly I was like, how come every single person working with me used to work on Wall Street? It was just like it's a great time to sit down and look at what's really important to me and focus on those things. And if that happens to be art and screenwriting, then fabulous.
A slightly different question to you, Mr. Gonzalez.
Mm-hmm.
If you're writing script today, if you're working with a producer, or if you're just writing something on spec, are you approaching that writing differently, considering the state of the world, the COVIDs, and it was something we'll get into later, how movie theaters are functioning in this kind of environment?
Yeah, I think that what we as humans are always experiencing and feeling, there is always going to be a residue of that is left on the page. And so while the situation or the specific story might still be different, I think the things that we feel, our fears, the things that we get excited about, those are sort of still going to resonate perhaps in the journey of our characters and where these stories are going. One thing I wanted to add, just to off of what Jess was saying in terms of writers right now, is I agree. I think that before this time, there was definitely, people were so busy they didn't have the time to write. That's not an excuse anymore. And, for some folks that might be very difficult because it could have been at the loss of a job. For others, it could have been just because they were constantly go, go, go. And now they don't have to waste time on the subway. Now they don't have to waste time, driving across town for meetings. And so they're able to really focus their creative pursuits more now than ever. So yeah, I think that creatively there is a desire and a hunger for storytellers to just really hunker down and focus. But, I'm actually curious, and if I could kind of pose a question to Jess, is how do you feel that the sort of how to stay positive in the midst of all this, right, while still feeling creative? How have you felt that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff out there that's like, just be happy, smile, gratitude. And if that stuff works for you, great. But there's a lot of cool studies that show that, like, if someone's really suffering and if someone's really in pain and you put on pop music, it only makes them sadder and more depressed. But if you put on like a Leonard Cohen, Fiona Apple mix, you know, that's just like audio torment of the soul, that it soothes them. And so I would say that looking for rest and soothing rather than positivity and happiness is going to be more effective and feel more possible for people. So finding self-soothing techniques, and everyone's quite different, but if you look at all of the senses, touch-wise, how can you, a lot of us are missing a lot of physical contact. Just like going through and stroking, it sounds so silly, but if you pet yourself like a cat, flesh on flesh, not my army green jacket, what sounds, what music is soothing, right? And makes you feel seen and connected? What smells do you have that you can use? What physical activities, finding, for me, I found some like weightlifting has been very soothing. I know for other people that wouldn't be true. But yeah, I would just say really focusing on soothing, because most Americans, I feel like, do not have a soothing technique that they have for themselves, but just making a list and trying out a bunch of things of what do I find soothing? Because I know some people who find, martial arts and Metallica soothing, because that's part of their soul. And I know other people that need, chimes and meditation and yoga, and, you're going to find what works for you. But I'd say don't try to be happy. Like, don't try to chase happiness. And don't even force yourself to feel, because if you try to force yourself to be positive without allowing the downside of things to flow through you, like, you just can't, you're just bottling up the negative emotions. So if you're feeling grief, you just got to feel the grief and then soothe yourself from feeling it. If you're feeling fear, allow yourself to feel the fear and then soothe from it. But the more we try to avoid or have emotions pass through us quicker than they want to, the more we're actually just trapping them, and they're becoming repressed in certain parts of our bodies, which then leads to physical ailment and avoidance, which is quite unhealthy. And yeah, so soothing.
But that's what I love about being a writer, is you can put it on the page. I mean, this is your absolute catharsis, isn't it? And that's what I love so much about screenwriters. When I chat to them we have a development slate of 159 writers now. And when I talk to them about their favorite movies, they reveal themselves. When I talk to them about the scripts that they've written, and they try and pretend it's about someone else, and they just say, you are on the page. That is the thing with writing, is even if you're writing to yourself or you're not, you think you're writing about someone else, something in that issue is something you are working through as a human. And I love that about it. And it's what I think is the connectivity piece, as to that you want to find someone else that feels that way too. So if you do get it in front of someone like a manager, and they're like, oh my God, I understand that piece. I understand how you feel. That connects with me too. That kind of whole connection thing that you can get from reading someone's work or helping someone who's a writer is just actually one of the best things about it. And I think everything it just says is so wise. I'm a jangly chimes and yoga woman myself, cats. But that idea of failing, splurging it out, doing a vomit draft, getting your feelings out even on the page, so that you can then process them. I thought I was going to be in COVID. I'm like, I thought there's going to be this amazing novel. I'm going to be up in a garret somewhere. I'm going to have an ink pen. It's going to be amazing. And that did not happen. And I was quite upset that I wasn't this amazing. There's all this stuff to come forth. But actually, it's meant I could focus a lot more time on helping other people. And that's actually what I really like to do. So that soothes me. So I guess that finding your particular way to feel happy and soothe yourself is, but get it out, write it down, splurge it.
A lot of that speaks to not just mentally being in a space to write, but you're kind of, you know, your voice as a writer, which is something that really can't be taught, is what I think is going to help resonate through any time. You know, if your voice can kind of connect to the right story in the moment, producers and everybody else will be attracted to that. So when we're talking about writing specifically for producers and everybody in the industry, you know, all the Zoom calls I have, everyone's at home now. So have you found that producers are more accessible these days? Are you able to have more meetings? Are the meetings going longer? Are they more substantive? Like what's happening with the meetings now? And let's start with Mr. Gonzalez again.
Sure. Yeah, I think I'm seeing both sides, right? I think there's some execs, there's some reps right now who they are reading quicker, which you would have never thought that could have been possible, but they're reading faster. They're more available to hop on a Zoom and take meetings with writers. And then there's others who, you know, they might have 3 kids who are in school, and so they're trying to, you know, wrangle them in front of their Zoom classroom, and you know, they're taking longer to read. And so I think there needs to be, and I think there is, I like to think that everybody has a little bit more grace during this time, knowing that there's some folks who are just, they're able to just be a little bit more aggressive than they were before because there's fewer distractions. Whereas there's others that, you know, they have a little bit more that they might be juggling, and that's okay. But I think just even those that are still busy, yeah, I mean, in terms of, you know, meeting with writers through our programs, you know, a lot of them have, the majority of them I feel that we work with have a lot more free time. And again, because they're not going to drinks meetings as much, they're not in the car, so they're able to meet with our writers. You know, just last week, this one producer in particular that, you know, we're working with through one of our competitions, you know, had 5 different writer meetings all in the same week. So yeah, I think that the other thing is, whereas before there may have been maybe a little bit more of a stigma towards taking a meeting just virtually like this, it had to be in person. My wife is a literary manager, and I know her clients, when they're pitching material now, they're virtual pitches, and, you know, they're not necessarily in the room anymore. And so there's a willingness, there's a flexibility there. Whether or not that's someone's preference, that's, you know, TBD, but I think that's how we have to continue to conduct business now. And so, you know, that's just the way it's going to be for the next little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that's a good advantage, though. Sorry to interrupt you there, Mike, because we have a guy that's pitching in New York, and we're taking out one of his projects, and it was very difficult for him. We'd have had to fly him out here. We'd have had to put him up. We'd have had, you know, and actually all we're doing is setting up a Zoom meeting. So I actually feel like it's giving people more opportunity. And there's always been a big discussion about if you were going to be a filmmaker or a writer, whether you had to be in LA. And I think for a little while that was the case. I mean, virtual writers' rooms are happening. So I feel like actually there's a bit more space and a bit more room, and people are deciding, do I want to live in a city? Do I want to live in a more rural area? You know, what's my life going to look like? What are my values? What are my priorities? So I feel like for writers, I love the fact that Wendy was saying that you've had attendees from all over the world and people kind of plugging in. And I love that connectivity about it. And I hope that will happen kind of moving forward in the business. Unfortunately, mainly it's still English speaking, but at least it does feel like you're allowed to be in other places or another country now.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, for my writers that I work with, I can say in the past 6 months, there has been more of my writers have gotten either like gigs, gotten signed. Like, it's actually, compared to any other 6-month period, I feel like, you know, it was really actually active. And I think that that was partially because they were able to take meetings so quickly and not have to fly around, and that, you know, yes, they're also working on stuff that's like really bold, and, you know, because that's the type of writers I like to work with. But I actually realized when I look back, I was like, oh my gosh, like, even though this has been a very difficult time, I feel like if you are doing the good work and you have, you know, a strong portfolio and like it, and you have a unique voice and you're being authentic to that voice, that, I mean, it's actually been pretty good for a lot of people I've seen that are just starting to get into the industry. But yeah, I do think I agree with the fact that I think it really depends on your home life. And, you know, my friends who have kids are like dying and just like, I'm not taking any meetings and only call me on Mondays. And, but yeah, there's other people, you know, who are like, whoa, like I have so much more time to take meetings and help writers and help people connect to other people. Because I do think that, you know, most of us, when, you know, this all happened, we were all just looking around going, what can I do? What can I know I did. I went from, I think, teaching 2 classes a month to I taught 8 classes, you know, that first month. I think I taught the same amount of teaching hours in the first 2 months as I did of all of 2019. And I think that, you know, because I think most human beings are really pure and good at heart. So I feel like we're all just kind of doing what we can do.
Yeah, I mean, again, strange times. And, you know, let me ask Wendy a question about how the pandemic may be affecting the festival. And also, you know, what was it that made you decide to add a screenplay or screenwriting competition to the festival? And has that been, you know, tough with the pandemic, and easy or just the same?
So first I'll talk about the pandemic. So when it first started, we were like, okay, we're just going to watch this and see what happens. And then as time sort of came into the summer, we're like, well, what are other people doing for festivals and how is that working? And then we were watching this, you know, how is Connecticut doing overall with the pandemic, right? So I think it was a little bit more challenging this year because we had to wait sort of as close as possible to the actual date of the festival to make final decisions, because we're hoping, you know, things open up more and we can do more people in one space. So we finally landed on doing a few things in person, but mostly things online. So all of our panels and workshops are online, and we had a lot of Q&As with our writers and directors online, and that seemed very well received in streaming the movies. So I think overall that went really well. It was more challenging because everything was like just in time, and you know, some of our venues were like, no, that we've used before, we're like, no, we're not doing anything. And so we had to limit where we could go and sort of what options we had. So it was definitely a little bit more challenging. But I think now that we've kind of survived it, right, and figured it out a little bit, we're still learning. I think in the future, we may still continue to do some virtual components of it, you know, so even if, you know, COVID's passed and we're back to normal, because we like having the availability of more people to be able to join certain panels and things like that. So that was actually a good output. For the screenwriting competition, the first 2 years, we were talking to a lot of people and networking with people and seeing what things have we sort of covered from the whole, you know, end-to-end filmmaking process. And a lot of people were saying, well, what about for screenwriting? A lot of the networking groups that I work with within Connecticut, including the ISA Third Thursdays that we have, a lot of the screenwriters like, how do we get more information? How do we get, you know, access to maybe some local filmmakers and do more? So we decided to add a lot more of the screenwriting education in our second year. And Jessica helped us a lot with that and was fantastic. And then for this year, we decided, well, let's have a screenplay competition. So I think just because it's not really as well known. You know, you kind of start and you ramp up over time. We didn't, you know, have a crazy number of people submitting, which was good because the first year we want to kind of have it slow and steady and be able to figure it out. But I think it was well received and we are getting good feedback. And so we plan to continue it in the future.
It's great. Those things are always tough. I mean, I used to enter those way back, and, you know, just thinking about who's reading your script and if you do well, like, can they really help advance your career? But I will say, even as just a little bit of an ego boost, it's always cool to advance in those things. So I think it's cool that you guys are doing something like that. So I want to talk a little bit about not just what we're writing specifically, but kind of the medium that it's for. Basically feature films versus television. And what do we feel like, you know, when we're writing these things, when we're starting out, when we say, okay, I have an idea, what is it that makes us say, this is a feature film versus this is a TV series, especially today when limited series are doing so well? And, you know, as one of the writers on When They See Us, I can speak specifically to how one could be it could be a feature or it could be a limited series. So talk about a little bit about how, you know, you might determine this is a movie or this could be a limited series or even an ongoing TV series. Let's start with Jess this time.
Well, I'm a firm believer that great story can be told in almost any capacity. Very rarely do I feel like there's something where it's just like, this can only be done as a film, or this should only be done as a... I mean, good story is good story, whether it's done as a novel or a ballet or a film or a series. I think it's just structurally, you're just looking at, how do I tell this story differently, right? So are you interested in, you know, are you really interested in that shift and that change in that character? Or are you more interested in a more cyclical structure that, you know, the character cycling, you know, through this world? What I usually tell people is I'm just like, what do you want to do? Like, what do you want to be writing for? I think it's more about the combination of like, what is in your heart, and then where do you want to be in, you know, 5 to 10 years if you're doing this as a career. And, you know, if you have no interest in writing for TV, if you're like, I don't want to be in a writer's room, then you probably should tell the story not in a TV format. But yeah, I mean, very rarely have I come across anything where I'm like, I'm like that, you know, you could do Walter White in a film, you know, it would just be different, but it could still be that story. So yeah, I just usually when I'm working with people on like, do I make this, or this? I'm like, what would you like to be writing professionally? And usually that's what the direction they go in.
You agree with that, Felicity? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about the size of the story you want to tell and the characters you want to fall in love with. You know, I feel like if you even, I know that now if you are someone that's looking to work in TV, you still need features because you need to show a manager or a producer that you can start a story, do a middle and get to the end. So you need both of them regardless, even if you want to concentrate on being a TV writer. I thought Jess's point, though, is exactly it. Why are you doing it? Who is it for? What's the best way to tell this story? I think features, again, it's like a completely different skill, but the story has to be large enough that we're going to care about the people and the character and what's happening to them on repeat for 5 years, maybe longer if it's doing well. So is there enough material in there? Do you like the characters enough? Are you willing to give it that much of your life and time? And I think features, it feels like a more manageable, don't get me wrong, it's still really hard to write a good one. But it feels like at least you can really flex your muscles, especially now when the audience is so bright and we're we pay attention so much. So if you show someone a pen, we're going to want to see what that pen means in the film or the TV show, you know. So the language is so articulate now. So to now do something where you fall in love with someone for 90 minutes and it affects you and you care about them and you still tell a story, a cohesive story, I think is really hard, because we've got used to being sat on our bums and watching 25 hours with someone. So I would say then your story needs to be vital if it's a feature, and it needs to be contained within that world, so that the restrictions of 90 minutes help it rather than hinder it.
Okay. Any thoughts on that, George? Any thoughts on, you know, whether a story should be specifically film or television?
Yeah, I think both Jess and Felicity sort of spoke to the core points there, but I just add that, yeah, I think ultimately, if you want to be in the television business and you want to be staffed on a show, then probably working on TV pilots is where you should be focusing your energies, and identifying stories that would lend themselves to that in terms of compelling characters that the arc, or again, if there's a story engine, right? If you have your monster of the week sort of thing, if that is very clear and distinct on the page, that there is that this is something to be told, but it also explored over a longer period of time, versus a feature, which is you want to make, regardless of what you're writing, you want to make an impact, right? And so if you have a specific story idea that you're determining, what is this better suited for? What's going to be the most impactful way to tell it? Can you succinctly tell it in 90 minutes to 2 hours and really wow people and have them just like completely just perplexed by what they just watched in a good way? Or is this something that you really can explore in a deeper way, and through that really touch into the humanity of an individual and the struggle that they may be dealing with, or the type of world that they might be living in? So yeah, I think it's just really unique to the idea, but then also just in determining what you want to do for your creative career, that might also just inspire you to go in a specific direction for something, again, assuming that the idea lends itself well to that medium.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with that. That I do feel like certain ideas are television and certain ideas are movies. But I do also feel like today, if you're a writer today and you're going to be a professional writer, that, and that's what you want to do. Writing, being able to write features, being able to write television, it's both of those skills are necessary. It's not, yeah, sure. If you want to be a writer in a writer's room, I'll just speak real quick from experience. When I was staffing my last show, the Colin Kaepernick show that I'm doing, what I was noticing is a lot of the screenplays, a lot of the scripts I was getting was very, very templated. The idea was, you can tell that these were writers who want to be television writers, and that they learned how to be television writers a certain way. I mean, the beats were it was very, very predictable in the story. The writers that I gravitated toward were the writers who I could tell loved writing versus wanting to be a writer. Those scripts that came into me where I could read and feel the passion, there was a few things that I learned about. I learned that you can feel passion on the page when somebody really loves writing, and you can hear their voice. And, of course, there's some elements of this is how we tell stories, but they're able to take that and turn it into something fresh. Your story does, I believe, belong to a certain medium. In the best way. It can belong to multiple mediums, but, I think Fargo the movie is a much better way to tell that Fargo story than Fargo the series, for instance. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. That's I find that interesting, and I think it's really cool that we're all just writers now. I mean, there's feature film writers or feature film writers who are making television and vice versa. So, you know, it's a cool time to be a writer in Hollywood and an aspiring writer in Hollywood. Let me ask you guys about features in general, because this is what I'm a little bit concerned about in the industry. As you know, the whole reason I ever picked up a pen was to be able to direct films, and I'm afraid, you know, I don't know what that's going to be like. I want to sit in movie theaters and watch the logo come up and be with the people and, you know, enjoy the movie. You know, I had a little bit of that experience at Sundance, and I want it again. So, what do we feel like is the future of feature films? Are we going to be watching films on Netflix and Amazon and Hulu? Not that those are, it's, I mean, I think it's great that the masses get to see those at the same time, but I'm nostalgic. You know, it's the what do we think about the theater experience? How do we feel like that's going to play out in the future? Let's just make it a conversation. Jump in if you have a thought.
I mean, I love questions like this because it reminds me when film came out and everyone's like, it's gonna kill theater. And when theater came out, it was like, it's gonna kill the radio. And, you know, I'm like, just, I mean, I do think it's gonna shift and change. It always does, but I think that it's gonna there's gonna become a freedom with it that is going to be quite lovely. I can tell you psychologically, though, that, you know, like the way we originally structured and wrote TV was because TV was not something you could pause. And it was in people's homes where there were distractions. And so there was this idea of coming in and restating at the beginning of every scene what's been happening and what's going on, because you're like, oh, if she has to go get the laundry from the other room, we need her to listen and still hear this story because she may not be always watching it. And now that we consume TV in a way where we can completely control it, we're starting to see a shift of television to have more of what we use traditionally in film, which is this belief that your audience is stuck in this room and does not have control over the pacing. And so I think that we're going to see a lovely movement back and forth when people start to realize, you know, one of my favorite drafts to do in a script is I'm like, let's do the audience draft. I mean, there's like the reader draft where we think about the psychology of the human being reading that script and their unique structure with it. But then looking at the audience draft, the more we can put a focus on really understanding psychologically, like what are the circumstances and what are the programs in the brain that are going to be operating when this person is consuming this media, and how do we make the most out of what that's going to be. And I'm super excited about it because I feel like we're going to find this place where, you know, TV and film are going to be more like each other and able to be more completely different. And I'm hoping that it's going to open up to more experimental and non-traditional narratives that we've already been seeing happening in TV and being quite successful.
Yeah.
I mean, selfishly, I'm with you, Mike. I love the movie theater, and like across the street from where I live, there's an AMC, and like I'm just like, I want them to survive because like I still want to walk across the street and go see a movie. I'd go 3 times a week, and it didn't matter what it was. You know, big budget, indie, like I just love being in a movie theater. I actually, my wife and I 2 weeks ago, you know, they were doing this thing down in Orange County where you could rent a theater to have a private viewing of Tenet. And we did it because I was like, that's a movie I want to see. You know, I'll drive an hour just to be in our own little theater to watch this movie because I love the movie theater experience. But yeah, I think that I like to think that, you know, theatrical movie releases will always be around. They are such a, you know, they generate billions of dollars of revenue for these studios. But I think that what we may see in the short term is obviously there's going to be a reduction in the number of feature films that are being made for theatrical release. And with the streamers in particular, you know, I think places like Netflix are really focusing a lot on, you know, this co-viewing experience, right? And this co-viewing experience being films that, you know, you could watch with your significant other, films that a parent could watch with their kids, And I think that's where you're going to see continued interest in sort of genres that are a little bit more evergreen, like, you know, rom-coms and holiday movies for places like that. But then also you have places like, I think, Amazon, who want to continue to stay competitive. And so they're going to be making some more sort of like commercial fare and, you know, kind of strive towards having those bigger titles. I also think budgets for these streaming features are going to increase too, you know, whereas maybe some of them were smaller budgets like the 10 to 15 range, you know, to stay competitive with other places like Netflix. You know, I imagine that these budgets are going to start, you know, ballooning to $20 to $50 million for some of these movies. But I guess the question is, like, it's the frequency. Like, how many of these movies will they actually be putting out? That's what sort of still remains to be seen. And I mean, I also wonder, you know, I'm a huge James Bond fan. And so, like, every time the Bond movie gets delayed again, I want to cry myself to sleep because, you know, I have nothing else to look forward to. So, but, you know, like, now they've had to do P&A spends twice on that movie, which is already has probably, you know, a $200 million plus budget. And they're still sort of eyeing probably a theatrical release. But how do you have a tentpole movie continue to be profitable? And again, I think this is just because we're in this pandemic transition time right now. But, you know, if you go straight to VOD, you know, is it going to make as much money? Like, is that going to be a winning business proposition for them? Because at the end of the day, it is a business for these studios. And so that's something that I always wonder. And then I wonder, like, is there a world that we live in where, you know, Netflix at some point adds another pricing tier where, you know, you have these movies like The Old Guard 2 or, you know, some of these really premium feature films that you're now then paying an additional sort of fee for. And this is purely speculative. Like, I don't know that anyone's doing this, but I just wonder in the future of, like, the feature film business, is that going to happen? And then, sorry, one more thought is just on the flip side is, what does this mean for the indie film market, right? Like, it was already tough for independent film producers to put movies together. Where is that space going to be? Like, is that going to be, are we going to see fewer independent films made? I think a lot of the indie films, like, you know, you have movies like Charm City Kings, which was a Sundance film last year, was acquired by HBO Max, and, you know, it's done well for them. You know, that's sort of like the pool of indie films that was sort of already out there, but, you know, are fewer of those movies going to be made? I don't know. Curious everybody's thoughts on that as well. But
yeah, I've been hearing about indie films and the demise of indie films for years and years. I just don't think indies are going anywhere. I think that, you know, there's always going to be someone out there willing to take a chance on a great script and a promising filmmaker. So, and now, I mean, the outlets, there's so many, I mean, people need content. So I don't know. I think that indies are going to be okay. But Felicity, did you have any thing to add to the theater experience maybe disappearing in feature films?
Well, I mean, I love the same thing. I'm one of those people, I don't know where you sit in the theater. I like to be almost on it. You know, I'm kind of like the front, kind of the screen's here. I'm here. My heart is pounding. I feel like I want to be in it. So I definitely miss that. I feel like if there is a vaccine and life gets kind of back to normal, are we going to flood to theaters and bars and comedy clubs and, you know, and movie cinemas? Are we going to do that? Maybe, you know what I mean? I think, I hope we can get less scared of each other. I feel like the mask thing really kind of makes us anxious about each other. So I hope that if there is a vaccine, that people remember how wonderful it was to go to the movies and actually go more. But things are always changing. I truly believe that most things are for you. I do believe the universe is for you. So there is something better for most people in this change. And I think I think you're right to be hopeful, Mike. I've heard that trying to get financing to $1 to $5 million movies right now is very tough, but that's because they don't know if where they're going to sell them. Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, a lot of those, HBO, bought up a lot of movies and a lot of properties at the very beginning of COVID, and they still are working out if they're going to actually be able to film them, get them made.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult time. However, I think if you're a writer, you're an artist, you just got to keep writing. And I think that means articles. I think it means short stories. I think it means blogs. I think you got to film with your phone. I was involved with a charity called Kids in the Spotlight, and that's for foster youth. And they had some really amazing people from big studios, execs, other writers that were helping these foster youth and work on their script. And they literally take it from writing it to casting it, to acting in it, to filming it, to then having a festival. If you are a writer, volunteer for that stuff, get involved in your community, help other people. This is a networking kind of world where you have to be great at what you do, sure, and you have to have an amazing idea, certainly, and you really do need a good voice, and it needs to be clear, and it needs to be your own and authentic, as Jess said, but then you also need someone to help you. You need people to help you. And I think everyone on this panel actually does that. We're all here trying to help screenwriters do their thing. And so if you help someone else in the process, then I think you will meet friends, you will meet people who can help you down the way. Be kind to people, realize everyone's doing their best. And I think just try and keep going in this moment. So that if there is a vaccine, and that you'll still have something that you have created in the meantime that someone could buy from you. Create, do a sizzle.
Well, it's interesting that you went on that path, because I was looking at some questions from the audience, and one of the questions for Jess was, says, from a psychological perspective, what are people struggling with right now, and what can we do as writers to help them? And I think Felicity just touched on a bunch of that, but Jess, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, building community is really important right now more than ever, because human interaction is very, very important for release of trauma. And whether people are aware of it or not, we all have trauma sort of stored in our bodies. And especially, I know for a lot of my writers, the COVID pandemic has magnified it. So, but building your community, and that's just a much better way of saying networking. So if anyone's scared of networking, just stop thinking of it as networking and start thinking of it as, oh, I need to widen my tribe. It's a wonderful time to start meeting and connecting with other people who care about what you care about. And, that a lot of that can just be volunteering. You're building community sideways and even slightly down, who can I help? Who can I, encourage is really, really important. And it's just really great to not only feel like we're being seen and heard, but to feel that we have use and that we have an effect on other people. And even if that's just joining an online book group, or there's just so many things that are happening, even if it is virtual. And I know that feeling of isolation and loneliness is one of the things that's most difficult for people. And so even just a common conversation with a barista, if you go to a coffee shop, can relieve a lot of that trauma and that isolation. But building community, definitely the soothing stuff. Another big thing that a lot of times people resist their writing because the goals that they're setting are too big for themselves. That's a huge one. Just neurologically, the body resists anything that the brain does not foresee as 180% possible of succeeding at.
Would you mind just give us an example of setting a goal that might be too big? What would a writer do?
So have you ever gone oh, I need to go finish my screenplay? And there's a little man inside of your head, and he's like, we're on page 10 of a first draft. We can't finish this today. Go, organize your sock drawer. Go look in the fridge. Binge watch Netflix. It'll tell you to do anything it knows you can do, because chemically the brain is trying to avoid the release of the stress hormone. So you can have your big goal if I want to finish my script, but you've got to break the goals down to the point where the little man in your brain goes, oh, we can totally open Final Draft and read what we wrote yesterday. Yeah, we can do that. We can do that. Cool, cool, cool. And so then it releases dopamine, which will drive you forward and create urgency with you in your writing. And I encourage anyone who, if there's deeper psychological reasons why you're not writing effectively, this won't be effective. But for most writing resistance, it's simply about the languaging we're using in our head, the goals that we're setting, and the images that pop up that signal to that person in the brain of like, do we run away from this task or do we run towards this task? It's one or the other, that's it. And so if you break it down and you're like, it should just be so easy that you roll your eyes and you're like, yes, Jessica, of course I can do that today. Right? When you get to the point where you're rolling your eyes, you're like, that's a good place to set a daily, the goal for the day. It's the same thing with fitness. You know, if I was like, Mike, go do 100 kettlebell swings today, probably your brain was like, I don't think we can do that. But if I was like, you know, can you go do 1 push-up? Your brain's like, yeah, we can do 1 push-up. And, you know, even if you're like, but Jessica, I want to eventually get up to 100. It's like, if you can't do 100 push-ups if you can't do 1. You can't write 100 pages if you can't write 1 page. And so most people, they get it wrong because they think they need to abuse themselves and push themselves. And they're like, I'm going to write, you know, and I'm like, it's neurologically impossible because the chemistry in your brain is putting you into fight, flight, or freeze because it's saying, danger, danger, we're about to fail. And then your ego is like, I'm on the line. I'm going to die if we fail at this. And so it's just doing everything it can to have you not write.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, now I want to ask you all kinds of questions about what I did. Like my summer was, it was a trying summer for me. I usually write pretty effortlessly, but being in Minneapolis with the George Floyd situation, with COVID, with I had a little bit of a health thing, but it ended up not being a big deal. It was psychological. I had never gone through anything like that. I'm making this extremely personal, but bear with me. But here's the thing. I had to write a comedy. I was writing a comedy, or I was supposed to be, and you know, I don't have a problem sitting down to write. My problem was I didn't feel like the world was funny. Even though like it was a very specific story, I'm sitting there thinking, I don't feel like writing this joke right now. You know, I don't feel like, you know, making light of this right now. It wouldn't come out of me. And then even when I finished the script, I noticed that a lot of the world seeped into it. A lot of the present day thing that's happening seeped into it. And it was a struggle. It was the hardest thing that I've ever had to write. And, you know, the thing is, I was super aware of what was happening. I just couldn't get around it. Anyways.
But that speaks to an even deeper, you know, what that is, which is if unconsciously you don't believe this thing is possible, your body's going to tell you to not do it. So if you're like, this isn't funny, or this is not the time where this can be funny, so now you're fighting against your unconscious beliefs. And there's a variety of ways to go in and rewire the unconscious beliefs if they're not serving you and if that's healthy. But also the idea that, you know, the reason I know all this was because I'd never had writer's block until I was a professional writer. And it hit me like a ton of bricks where I was like, wait a minute, I've been writing for decades and I'm never been blocked. And now I have this really important task where an entire species of animal is dependent upon this script. And I couldn't figure out how suddenly I had no access to my creativity. My craft was failing me. And I was just, you know, I hated writing. It was the first time I hated writing. And so, you know, doing all the research I could to be like, I need to understand what's happening in my brain. And then applying it where I had to go hour by hour, you know what I mean? Like I was still writing 8 hours a day because that's what you do. And, you know, you're like, I'm going to write 12 hours a day on this. But, you know, it's just setting those tiny goals of, I'm like, all right, I'm just going to write for 30 minutes or 3 pages, whatever comes first. And then I'm going to get up and I'm going to go get a Pop-Tart. And that's going to be my reward. I did not have good eating habits back then. But yeah, checking in, but if anyone's struggling with like if you truly have an unconscious belief that like you're not a great artist, it's going to be very, very difficult, which I work with people sometimes that struggle with that, or like my writers who are Emmy Award winners, but have only been directing other people's work for the past 7 years. I have a writer, my most successful writer, who hadn't written anything of his own in 9 years because of this. 9 years he went just serving other people's work and directing other people's work and show running other people's shows, because there was this unconscious belief that developed underneath him, which was, I have nothing left to say. And if you truly at your core unconsciously believe you have nothing left to say, your body is going to always tell you not to write, because it's like chemically the body wants to avoid failure. And so it would put him into fight or flight every single time, which was just flight, which was go do something else, go do something else. Fight in this instance is when you hear those voices like, you're not good enough. No one's going to listen to this anyway. You're never going to be able to sell that. Right. So that it makes perfect sense to me with at least the work I've done and with the people I've worked with, where I'm like, I think, yeah, writing a comedy, possibly one of the most challenging things I think ever could be asked of you at that time.
Yeah.
Comedy's hard. The comedy's hard before you have a pandemic, It's so hard getting the timing right, getting the jokes right, making sure it has the right appeal, making sure the characters are still authentic. Don't try and make them funny. Is it the situation or are they witty? What's the language? I mean, the comedies are hard. So good on you, Mike, for getting through it.
Yes. Thank you. Whitney, you're not saying too much. You're just over there chilling. I'm watching you chill. But I'm gonna get you in on this, and I'm gonna ask you how, your day-to-day life, just dealing with everything, just this, you're putting together a festival. The screenplay. Do you read the scripts? Did you notice it? I'm sure the scripts were written before the pandemic, but is there anything that you want to tell anyone, listening about, how they can do better next year, or, something that stood out this year that excited you for the future?
So I think a lot, and, some of it's, writing 101, right? Some of the things that are early to see is when you're doing the first read, right? Most of the screenplays I read more than once, right? The first one's like a quick read just to get a sense and a feel, and then you go back and do more of the analysis. But a lot of it was some of the quick ones that you weed out are, okay, by page 10, do you know what this story is about? And so I would say to people, make sure that it's very, very clear in those first 10 pages what the story's about, because, you get a plethora of ranges of some you have no clue after 10 pages what it's going to be about. So you're like, how many pages do I have to go to figure out what it is? And some were spot on, even by like page 5, bam, you know exactly what it's about. You're hooked already and you want to read more, right? So there's definitely that beginning piece. I found the submissions that we had were not all the same themes. There were a lot of different things. Some were historical, some were current time periods, some were comedies, some were drama. And it was actually really interesting to read all the different types of writing. And the ones that really resonated, I think, the most with the group was the ones that were a little bit more diverse, a little bit more unique, than just sort of the cookie cutter stories that you see out there. With the pandemic, to answer the second part of your question, it's just, I think it's getting the festival moving, working, trying to do own projects and everything that everyone has going on. It's just a lot of time management, right? With trying to make sure everything gets done. So it's trying to make sure we're giving feedback to people to get the festival going and keeping, the daily lights on in your normal everyday life.
Yeah. So I don't know. Another question. This is for anybody, for the entire group. now it's just me, talking to writer friends. When you're writing now, do you feel like I'm going to have people in masks, walking the streets from, in my movies and my television shows? Like, I'm not going to ignore this pandemic. Like, or are you thinking, because listen, I don't feel like it's going away for a while. I think, there's a train of thought where, we're 2 years away from, maybe being okay. And there's going to be new shows. There's going to be shows that take place in 2020, so to speak. If you were writing a show like that or a movie like that, do you ignore the pandemic? Do you say, COVID doesn't exist in this world? Because that's you kind of got yourself a science fiction movie at that point, because it clearly exists. So what would your approach be to COVID if you're writing a present day story? Anyway.
Something I'll comment on is just in some scripts that I've read recently, they take place in a world. It seems like they've skipped over the year 2020. Like, not that it didn't exist, but that we are already living in the post-pandemic world, right? So they will talk about events or things that have happened in the very recent past, which acknowledged people were wearing masks, there was vaccines, and there was this massive global pandemic. But they are not then taking that sort of like mask wearing, like they're not applying that to the now of their story. So at least recently I've seen that a lot for some stories, and I haven't really read anything where people are walking around with masks on. Again, that's just in a lot of things I've read recently. I'm curious what the group thinks.
No, I think that's very interesting, because I'm working on a book right now, and then a piece that takes place in like the 80s. So I haven't really been in that world, but of all the things I've read, and I'm reading 300 to 700 pages of screenwriting a week. It's in the same thing, actually. There's been either a, near future that, yes, it all happened, but there doesn't seem to be much permanent effects on it, or it's been more into mostly what I've seen is a really heavy deep dive into the cultural shifts that are happening, and like multiple projects diving into like cancel culture and stuff like that, but not much with the pandemic and the masks at all, actually.
No, in the UK they've continued they kind of have these weekly soap operas in the UK, and they show twice a week, and they haven't mentioned it. But it's kind of now, but they don't really mention it. They just have the actors stand 6 feet apart. So in every scene you have
what are the names of these programs?
EastEnders is called in Coronation Street.
Yes, of course.
So you will literally have one person in the doorway, kind of like over here, going, so how you feel, like leaning on the door, and then the other will be on the couch, kind of going, oh yeah, and they are just literally shouting at each other, and they're trying to find inventive ways to kind of look like they're closer, just from camera angles and stuff like that, when they're really just very far apart. But again, they're not mentioning it. And I feel like at the moment, even with the people I'm speaking to, they're like, well, I don't want anything dark. I need something light. I need something. Everyone's looking for literally the antithesis of this. They're looking for the comedies that are hard to write when you feel miserable and you've been alone by yourself, and they're looking for something that is about humanity and uplifting our spirits and remembering the good old days. I feel like there'll probably be some nostalgia stuff because before COVID. But I think, again, you have to write to your authenticity. But I think actually it's this low level panic that there is about what life might look like. I mean, especially with the election happening here in the States at the moment, which has its own resonance. All the stuff that happened in the summer, the unrest, the fires, there's a real general sense of And we don't know what anyone for the UK Brexit, we don't know what anyone's life is going to look like next year financially in the world with jobs, that there's a kind of low level sense of that anyway. And TV and features and art is supposedly where we go to forget. So I think, that's our soothing, isn't it? As Jess was saying, that's the place where we go to try and find the possibility that it's all going to be okay, that the world isn't on fire, and, you're going to it's worth having a kid or whatever you want to do.
Yeah. But I think it's interesting because there are two types of people. There's the people who are like, I need the happiness here. And then there's the other people who are like, no, I need the mirror to my misery. Like, I need the thing that acknowledges the pain that's inside of me. Like, that's more of like the type of work I do as someone who writes twisted, messed up, like loving, like tortures, just in everything. But I think it comes down to the fact that, the strongest unconscious bias you have really is ageism. And it comes from an intense fear and refusal to come to terms with the fact that we will die. Very, very real. And I do think that there's so much going on. And I think that because of the pandemic, it's made things that normally we would not be able to pull out these repressions and see them and look at them. I think because of this, like, oh, well, I'm not going over there. Like, it's like when you write something into a script knowing your producer is going to say, hell no, we can't do that. So you write something even more bigger and ridiculous so that they can say no to the first thing. And then be like, well, at least so you can bargain for the other part of it. I do think that, that's sort of what's happening with how much our world is changing and shifting. And I think that most writers, most people are like, I am not emotionally and psychologically prepared to really look at the death of myself, of my family, of my culture, of my world. And so it's becoming a repression, which is going to become a shadow, which eventually is going to seep out in a variety of ways.
One of the projects that I'm working on and just released is a web series on YouTube. And we started out where we were filming, in person, and had sort of the different skits and things that we want people to interview and so forth that we wanted to do. And then COVID hit. So we stopped for a few months and we're like, well, I don't know when it's going to stop. So we took time and revamped it. And now we do it via Zoom, and we do interviews, and we sort of cut the original footage and kind of plug it in places. So we had to kind of adjust our format for the world that we're in so that we could actually just keep something moving.
Let me ask about your work environment specifically, and this is for everyone again. Where do you write? Where do you create? What's that room like, or those rooms like? I tell people all the time, I don't know, a few people know my story, but when I was writing Mr. and Pete on spec, I had a little baby. And he was growing older and going to preschool, and I would just take my laptop with me everywhere. I would write in the parking lot of his preschool because I didn't want to go home and like waste that time. I would, if my wife went to Target, I would drive her to Target and just sit in the car and write while she was in Target. I would just write anywhere and everywhere while I was writing that script. And eventually, things got a little better for us, and I was able to have an office. And now, it's weird for me. A lot of people think it's weird that I need dead silence to write. So I'm just wondering about people's atmosphere. Like, what do you like to do to create? Wendy, you should start, and then we'll just go in clockwise.
So for me, I have an office space, but I'm still the type of person, while I have final draft and everything, I'm a pencil paper person, because it's just the way I like to get things done. So, I may start out in my office, and then it might be, okay, I had to go make dinner or do this other thing, and I kind of bring my stuff with me. Then I might come back to it while I'm actually watching something I've seen a zillion times on TV just to have background noise, and I'll be writing like on the couch. So, for me, I can write almost anywhere. It's just a matter of figuring out when and where I can do that.
Felicity, where do you get busy?
This is going to sound weird, but I think I always have my best ideas in the shower. There's something about in the moment of just having the water kind of splosh over you, and it's, I guess it's a sensory thing as well. You're not looking at, and your phone isn't at you. You're kind of elsewhere, and those moments in kind of reflection in the shower, I always have some fun ideas there. When I used to write kind of comedy stuff, I used to in the shower. I also kind of like it in that if you can manage to get a pad and pen by your bed for ideas that, as you're falling asleep or if you're having a dream. I actually had the most excellent dream about 2 nights ago, and I was aware that I was dreaming. I was kind of lucid dreaming, and I just took myself on all the adventures in my head that I can't go on right now. So I was in Paris, and I'd met this dude, and I was like, I was really kind of going for it. I was having the best time. And I guess that's what I'm suggesting, is that allowing your imagination a spot to really kind of run free. This is my kind of office. It's a tiny bit messy. I like things. And a couch. But I think wherever you feel, but I don't have children. I think that's the thing. If you have kids, it's very different trying to find a place away from everywhere else, but you need your sanctuary. So I would say whatever your sanctuary looks like, that's the place to write for me. So shower obviously is my sanctuary.
Yeah. How about you, Jess?
Well, I'm a coffee shop writer, so I had to shift very quickly. So if anyone else is the type of person where you're like, I go to my coffee shop, I've mostly been writing, luckily with the weather permitting, I've been in my park that's near me in Brooklyn, which is great because nature is absolutely fabulous for creativity. But if you are someone who's stuck in your home, I suggest that finding different nooks and crannies in your home. Like if you have never sat cross-legged in your bathtub and written a scene, then you need to go and do that today. If you have never crawled underneath your kitchen table and written a scene, you need to go do it. If you have never stripped down butt naked and written a scene, like the great thing about these techniques are that they create new perspective, which is great for creativity, but also they create a certain level of vulnerability, which is really important for the creative process. I know that most people think that creativity comes from intelligence, and it doesn't. Creativity comes from emotional stimulation. So for me, it's been mostly just, my body goes very numb when it feels threatened. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I was quite numb, and I was like, all right, we're going to go into edit mode because I know I'm not going to be capable of feeling anything. And that means when I go into that, that's when I do all my editing. So when I'm feeling but I just think that taking yourself somewhere where when you look, you're seeing things that you're not used to seeing, and that you have that diversity, because diversity mixed with vulnerability is one of the best combinations for using the most valuable creative parts of your brain.
What do you think, George?
Yeah. I agree with Felicity that, I'm convinced that like in the shower, like I can like solve all of the world's problems just, in one long 30-minute shower. But no, I've also find that like creatively, coffee shops were my place to go. I like silence, so it'd be like, or I also like silence like you, Mike. But I like the visual distractions, or if I choose to look up, I can sort of see something or someone, and people watch, as I like to call it. I just found that very just influential creatively. But this is sort of this room, before, like, earlier this year in January, my wife and I moved to a 2-bedroom. And so now there's this space that is sort of just like the workspace. And when I didn't have that before, it was very hard to find that sort of, I couldn't get comfortable under the kitchen table or wherever it was. But now I've sort of mentally created like, hey, when in this space, like this is serious, this is work time, so I've been grateful for that. Also earlier on when I was like a teenager, strangely enough, I worked at a driving range. And so I would drive around in a little cart picking up everybody's golf balls. And the radio in the little cart was broken. So that was like similar to the shower. There was no distraction. So I would have like all these great creative ideas, like, early on, until of course someone hits the cage with a line drive, and it would, shake the shit out of me and wake me up. But otherwise, like, yeah, I find that sometimes in those sort of moments of silence where there are no distractions, putting your phone on airplane mode, like whatever it is, like you can find that you can be creative in places that maybe you didn't think you could, at least for me.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is knowing what you're writing, being excited about that thing you're working on. That helps. I know Jess can speak to that, but there's just one of my little tricks has always been, and I can't remember, it was a famous writer. It was probably Elmore Leonard, since that's my favorite writer. But someone said that you should always leave off with the thing that you're excited about for the next day, and that's my trick. I mean, if I know the next scene that I'm writing is something that I'm pumped about, it's so much easier to go sit down and just bang that out. And I try to do that every day. And I don't think it would matter, honestly, where I am, but I do prefer, to just be in silence in my office.
Can I just say one quick thing? Because I think everyone was the reason why great ideas come in like the shower or like driving the car. This is a brain function thing. This is not like genius writers or not. This is why I tell people, like, you should never think when you're writing. Thinking is the end. When you go to thinking brain, it literally cuts you off from what you're in analysis mode, which means you can't come up with anything new. The brain actually cuts you off from taking in anything new. So you can only work with things that you already have. But when you go to take a shower, what happens is you move into a different system in the brain because you know how to shower. You can do it without thinking. And so you just start daydreaming. You start visualizing. You start looking internally, which is a different function in the brain than actual like sitting down and being like, let me fix this problem with my script. So if you go into cognitive fix-it mode, you can only do things that you've ever seen done before. That's where you get really cliche writing and it feels really tight. But if you go do an activity where you're kind of like your body is on automatic pilot and you just start daydreaming, that's when you have the ability to reach down into the unconscious and pull up and collage and create new things. So my thing is always like, if you're staring at a blank page for more than 5 minutes, you're thinking and you need to stop, get up, move, and just allow yourself to daydream with the visualization, because visualization will put you into that mode that is creative rather than the brain function of analysis.
Sorry,
go ahead.
I was going to say, Mike, something that you mentioned that just to build off of, you mentioned like you enjoy writing first, sort of the thing that you're most passionate, like you're most excited about. And I remember this was a couple of years ago at the Austin Film Festival. It was Phil Hay was talking about how he and his writing partner Matt Manfredi would write. They would storyboard all of their scenes, right? And then in terms of assigning who was going to write what, they would approach it like the NFL draft. They'd be like, all right, I want this scene. I want this scene. I want this scene. And then at the end, they'd actually have a couple of scenes left over and they'd go, I don't want to write that scene. And the other one's like, I don't want to write that scene. They're like, well, why? And they're like, oh, then they determined that sometimes those scenes, there was something that was inherently like broken or like not working about that scene, or that it was just expendable and it didn't need to come out. So I thought that was interesting, like just perspective in how to look at your story differently, but also identifying what you really are excited to write as well. And then using that as a way to say, hey, maybe this thing isn't working here. So I just want to build off of that because I love that you share that about your writing.
No, I think that's great, actually. I think that's great. We're running a little short on time, so let me hop into a couple of these questions from the audience. So the first one I want to ask is, okay, this is from Be Well Productions. It says, just like cell phones are a part of many stories now, or date the stories, will the same thing apply to including Zoom/web calls as a part of post whatever post CO is? I don't know what that is. Basically, I think the question is, do we think that Zoom calls and these types of web calls are going to be, everything gets old, is what I'll say.
Haircuts,
so yeah,
clothing, it's like everything's going to date everything. So yeah.
I think it will place us in time, and there's something kind of wonderful about that. But I mean, I hope one day we can look back at this moment with nostalgia, because I feel like everyone needed a rest. Do you know what I mean? I feel like the whole world was like, we have been working too hard, we need a rest. So maybe there'll be this moment where we can think, actually 2020 reset our goals, made us really understand what we wanted with our lives, really kind of focus what was important. But so I think it will be mentioned in scripts in the future when they talk about this year and what people learned from it, or what's going to happen next. I think the only thing about Zooms is they're not very fun to watch, as on a TV show or in a feature. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, it's fun like this because you're in your home, but you want to see more of people in a show.
I will say that I watched the new Borat last night, and they found a way to make a FaceTime call pretty funny. I'll just add that. That was amusing to me. Anybody else take a stab at that? I have another question from Carol Healy. Carol wants to know, do you think established actors would want to star in movies where they will not be recognized?
Depends on the role.
I think this question came into when we were talking about, are we writing scenes with like wearing masks and things like that?
Oh, that's okay. There's the context. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, still.
I mean, it depends on the role. It depends on the actor. It depends on their agent. It depends on if they're getting divorced that year or not. Like.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like if the story is something that they really feel attracted to, I definitely think but this has been happening before COVID, there was a shift from movie stars moving to TV shows. And there was a lot more acceptance of less snobbery around TV shows. And what it meant, suddenly people went, oh my goodness, I can live in LA, I can go to work at the studio, and I can be home and have a life rather than have to go away on location and film for a year. So I think people suddenly realized, like, hey, TV's better than I thought. I think there are certain roles. I mean, like Nicole Kidman in The Hours, where she had the nose. I mean, like, she wasn't recognized. She didn't look like herself there. But it was a great, character role, and she was nominated for an Oscar because she would do that. She would dare to look ugly. How women are portrayed in films.
The funny thing is, in a sense, actors have been, especially male actors, it's so funny. Like, I'm thinking of The Fugitive. Didn't Harrison Ford have like a beard at first, and then he shaved it? Like, there's always movies where, like, the lead actor is going to have something with his face, and then when he's on the run, we get to see what he really looks like. There's always been masks in movies, so to speak, in television shows. And no one. I think that it definitely does depend on the actor, but it also depends on the role and what we want to see. A lot of the times when you're talking about these big studio films, especially used to be star driven. These things are kind of IP driven now. Anybody, I'm not saying anyone could have played Iron Man, but Iron Man is a suit. We're going to see what the cool thing that suit's going to do. So
I think it could possibly be a more financially, like if you look at Power Rangers, that footage of Power Rangers, like that's all footage that was used other places. All they had to do is film the scenes when they take their heads off and their helmets off and talk. And I'm like, that was one of the like cheapest shows to make that was amazing. And then you look at something like The Masked Singer, where like, you know, this idea that people seem to love that show and you're not seeing anyone because of the possibility of who it might be underneath. I don't know. I think,
yeah, I think there's also this idea. It's like, you know, especially when it comes to like biopics, and it's usually around this time of year where someone, you know, you mentioned Nicole Kidman, like she was also in like Destroyer, where, you know, her makeup, and then you have Charlize Theron, who did Monster, and it's, you know, you have, who like go deep into this sort of like prosthetic makeup thing, and, you know, people are always like, oh, they're trying to get their Oscar, you know. So I think there is an openness to sort of not be traditionally recognized as who they are, and I think that might be part of the fun of being an actor, right? Is just you know, what's the Batman movie, you're looking at Colin Farrell, who's like, you know, made to have like this different nose and like, you know, receding hair and like, you know, wearing like a bodysuit, and, you know, what's interesting about that, it doesn't look like, you know, the dashing, you know, Colin Farrell that we're used to seeing. So I think that, yeah, I think that there's definitely an openness to that. And I don't imagine that, you know, the stuff that's even being filmed now, I don't see a lot of people wearing sort of masks and things like that necessarily, because it may not just be inherent to the story that's being told, but yeah. So, but I think people will always still want to dress up, right? Isn't that fun?
We're gonna take two more like super quick questions here. This one's from Stanton. Stanton wants to know, how will the new Oscar diversity rules affect which scripts get read and made by producers? I actually think it may have a little bit. I can't see anything but positivity coming out of this, if anything. I don't know if it'll make a difference of what they read, but it should make a difference of the people who we get to see on screen and the stories that get told.
Yeah,
so,
and in front and behind the camera. So that's what I like about it. So, you know, it was a long time coming, but what it's done, it's that consciousness. It's actually now people are thinking about it. It's been put into our consciousness as something to consider, and it's about time. So, yeah, I'm glad for it.
Okay. All right, I'll move on to the next question, and this will be the last one. Just a question about, what are your future projects? What are your future film and television projects? Start with Wendy.
For me personally, I'm going to continue working on my 2 web series, and then hopefully in 2021 get back to a short film that we sort of shelved for a little bit given COVID, and then move on to a feature. So that's kind of what I'll be working on.
Okay.
I have we're taking out 2 animated projects to studios. So with our writers, I will be. I have a project that my friend wrote that I would like to help him produce. But it's very friendly, COVID friendly, and I will be continuing to help writers follow their passion and hopefully achieve their dreams by getting them general meetings and with managers and producers and execs, and read more scripts. You know, I want to hear the stories. I want everyone to know that your story is important. You do have a voice, and we need to hear from you.
Jess?
I'm working on a lot of curriculum and book right now. One of the things I'm focusing most on this next month and a half is alternative structures and screenwriting through Jungian shadow work, which is one of my favorite ways of growing structure from inside out rather than outside in. And then currently in my soul and my art, I have this strange, I have no idea what it is. I've got about 40 pages of this there's a fisherman and an aviator, and I don't know, they're in this bar that's only open once every on leap day. And I have no idea, you know, but it's cool. and I have no idea what it is, but I'm just following my characters and showing up and letting them lead the way, and it's really creepy and weird. So it's perfect for this time of year.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then right now, I'm not personally working on any specific project, but through Roadmap Writers, we're all about advocating for writers and celebrating writers and helping them to get signed so that they can further their creative goals and pursuits. So reading an absolute ton right now, but that's what makes it fun, and helping other writers fulfill their career goals. So
I know we have to wrap up here, but I just want to add real quick. Give you all an opportunity to. We're in a social media time, so where can people find you? Are you on Twitter, Instagram? Where would you want people to follow you, or contact you, or anything like that? So go ahead and plug your Twitter. I'm at Starrbury Mike on Twitter. If anybody wants to follow me, beware of some political content when you do that.
I feel bad. I'm much more of a lurker than a poster. But anyway, I'm at Felicity555 on Twitter.
I am not a Twitter person. You can follow me on Instagram at meditative_writing, or you can just visit my website, which is meditativewriting.org.
Yeah, similar to Felicity, I'm more of a lurker. I don't post that much, but yeah, if you want to connect, you can do so through Roadmap Writers, which is on Twitter or Instagram. It's at Roadmap Writers, or you can visit us at roadmapwriters.com.
Yeah, you can also find me at networkisa.org. I should probably plug the company over.
And for me, through my production company, Wilkadoos Productions at yahoo.com is the easiest way to connect with me.
All right. I think that is a wrap for today.
Thank you,
Mike.
Mike.
You guys have been amazing. I learned a lot, and I'm glad I got to spend this time with you and get to know you a little bit. So thank you for that. And thanks everybody for watching and listening. And I appreciate the opportunity to do this. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank
and everyone,
you.
thank you from the Mystic Film Festival for joining and being on the panel today. It was been fantastic. Great conversation.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.